hear a little bit more about Rookery Bay in a few minutes from my counterpart, Raquel. So just to let you guys know, we are hosting this lecture series, of which this is the final one, in partnership with the Greenscape Alliance, which is a group of environmental professionals down here in Southwest Florida who are working together to increase sustainability and protect natural resources by increasing community awareness. So thank you so much for coming and being willing to learn. I would also like to recognize our sponsor for these events, Koeser. So today's event is sponsored by them, and they are a leader in advanced organics recycling. They specialize in manufacturing high-quality, contamination-free compost and mulch products through a proprietary process that prioritizes sustainability. They divert green waste from landfills, reduce carbon emissions, and through all that, they produce Ryals Prime, which is a premium compost that enhances soil health, improves water retention, and supports resilient native landscapes. We are lucky enough to have Bob Boyd. He is the South Florida representative in the room today. So if you guys have any questions or are interested in that, I encourage you to pop back there and ask him questions. And on your way back to your seat, you can swing by the snacks table, which they so generously provided. And we're very thankful for because we all love snacks. Okay. Yeah, thank you for the snacks. So just to give you guys quick information, if you need to use the restroom, it is straight out those doors, all the way across the library to the other side along the wall over there. In the case of a true emergency, we have 3 fire exits, 1, 2, and 3. And so we would just exit out those doors. All right, so that's enough of that. Now on to the exciting part. We're going to be covering trees today, especially trees in our urban landscape. And we have 3 fantastic speakers here who are going to cover tree selection. And we'll get to meet them as they come up. But now I'm going to hand it off to Raquel to give us an intro into Rookery Bay and who they are and what we do.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. Can you raise your hand if you heard of Rookery Bay or been to Rookery Bay? Okay, most of you. Well, good. I'm glad to hear that. So my name is Raquel and I work for the Friends of Rookery Bay. If you don't know what that is, I'm gonna go over a little bit but it's the nonprofit, 501c3 nonprofit that supports the reserve, doing a lot of different things that they're not allowed to do. And at Rookery Bay, our motto is yours to explore, yours to enjoy, yours to protect. Unlike national and state parks, this is a public area. You can go fishing, kayaking, boating, swimming. You can walk in some areas. Mostly is water, but there are some areas where you can hike. And of course, you can visit our environmental learning center. There is an admission there. And of course, we want you to share with your family, your friends, and protect this area. It's one of the last undisturbed mangrove areas, one of the biggest in the world. So it's very important and we want to keep it that way. So there are 2 organizations, Rookery Bay Research Reserve and Friends of Rookery Bay. There are 2 separate entities, but they work very closely together. We collaborate in a lot of different things, while the reserve focuses on science, education, research, conservation, and coastal training, like the program that you're attending today. Friends of Rookery Bay is basically the face for the reserve. They're a federal and state agency, so they're not allowed to do a lot of things. So we are the public face for them and we do advocacy, outreach, volunteer recruitment, and fundraising, because they're also not allowed to solicit or do any events to fundraise for their programs. So we both are committed to protect this area for future generations. And the reserve itself is 110,000 acres of water and land, which is about 40% of Collier County coastline. If you see that map there, everything that's highlighted in purple is the reserve, and the red star is where the Environmental Learning Center is. This has been protected for over 40 years, and if you don't know, Collier County is actually the biggest county in Florida, so 40% of that is a big area. And we're part of a national network of about 30 reserves. There's 3 actually on the make. There's a lot of them around the country. So if you are seasonal or you love traveling, I highly encourage you to find one reserve near you. They're all very unique, very different. Some of them are bigger, some of them are very small, but very beautiful. And they're all estuaries, and our federal partner is NOAA. So the power of this network is that our voice is heard when it comes to funding and to a lot of laws that actually affect the reserve system. So this is very important too. And on the state side, the state partner is the Department of Environmental Protection. And they not only protect these reserves, but also a lot of areas around the state. There's 4 million acres of protected area. There are aquatic preserves and then some sanctuaries and other conservation areas as well. They do that, of course, in collaboration with a lot of other organizations, because it's not an easy task to manage and protect all this area there. And I like to show these numbers here because this is just some of what the impact that the reserve has on the community. From educating a lot of different people that come to the learning center, to protecting sea turtles and birds and prescribed burns, water quality, and a lot of other things. NOAA estimated that actually the reserve supports the community with about $58 million a year, which is a huge amount, because this area is very productive in a lot of different ways. But this is just some of the things that we do. And if you haven't visited our environmental learning center, I recommend that you stop by. There's touch tank and aquariums, there's a trail, a pollinator garden. We have rotating exhibits, art exhibits every 2 months or 3. There's one, and I will show you what's coming up. We have volunteers there giving you an educational experience. There's a trail in the back, a historic and cultural exhibit, and you have the chance to see a short video about the reserve and learn a little bit more about what they do there. Some of the activities we offer: boat and kayak tours. Our partner, Rising Tide Explorers, is 100% biologists, so you not only have a fun experience, but very educational. We have birthday parties that also are tailored for specific groups, educational component again. Like I mentioned, the art exhibits, we do facility rentals at the learning center and a lot of lectures and classes. Some of them painting and photography, and then during season we have birding workshops, forest bathing, lunch and learns. There's one more actually coming up in May 1st. If you want to learn about history and culture, it's a very interesting way to do it. You get a lunch and then you can listen to a presentation for 1 hour. And there's a lot of other special events that we have throughout the season as well. Some of the upcoming ones, we have a science night. We're gonna have a panel of discussion about history and culture, and appetizers and drinks. You can mingle, you can talk to our researchers, and that is April 30th from 5:30 to 7:30. We also have our big community day coming up May 3rd. It's free, and there's gonna be a lot of different activities for adults and children. And there is an art exhibit reception May 8th. FGCU students are creating art specifically for Rookery Bay, and the theme is wildlife and wild places. So if you are around here during that time, I encourage you just go online and sign up. It's free. Again, wine and some appetizers, and you can see the art and mingle and learn more about the reserve. And if you belong to a club or community that is interested in learning a little bit more about what the reserve does and the friends, You can scan the QR code, we can come to you free of charge and just tell you a little bit more about this wonderful organization. And there is not only one, but 180 reasons to become a member of the Friends of Rookery Bay, because when you do that, you actually get access not only to one place, but to a lot of different places around the country. Free and discounted admission. We also offer you discount to our eco tours, our nature store, our classes and lectures. So if you want to learn more, you can go to our website as well. And how can you make a difference if you learn something? Please share with your family and friends. There's a lot of people that haven't heard about Rookery Bay, and it's a big area. Explore the reserve. There's different ways to do that. Attend a program or event like this. Become a member or learn about volunteer opportunities. Like I said, 110,000 acres. We need volunteers all the time. We have about 400 active volunteers in the reserve doing a lot of different things to support us, but we're always recruiting. And if you haven't done so, I encourage you, please follow us on social media. We are Friends of Rookery Bay and Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or go to our website. There's always a lot of information there of upcoming events and things, activities, and a little bit more about us. And with that, enjoy the lecture and thank you for coming.
Okay, just to let you guys know how it's going to be set up. Each speaker is going to come up. We're going to have a short time for questions afterwards as we deal with technology. So really quick, we are recording this for later for your reference, or if you'd like to share it out. And I would like to recognize Marissa for being my tech support today, so I don't have to deal with that because it's my nightmare. So thank you so much. But we will, again, be sharing it out probably about a week or two after the lecture with all of the other resources that our presenters reference throughout the time. So if you don't get to your questions within that question time, at the end, we're going to have all three of them come back up, and then you'll have an extended time for questions at the end of the lecture series. Just wanted to give you an idea of that. Now I'm going to introduce our first speaker, which is Dr. Andrew Koeser. So he is an associate professor at the University of Florida's Gulf Coast Research and Education Center, and he specializes in arboriculture, urban forestry, and tree biomechanics. His research focuses on urban tree species diversity, storm resiliency, and incentive programs for tree planting and preservation. He enjoys biking, spending time with his 4 daughters, and he has the best dog name, I think, ever. His basset hound is named Chewbacca. So we are going to warmly welcome up Dr. Koeser.
One more second for the technical side of it.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me. Starting out today with one of the first decisions you have to make, which is selecting a species for your property, right? Never mind, we're not starting out.
One more thing, there we go.
So, one of the first decisions you have to make is like, what species are you going to select for your property? There's a lot of things that go into that. Many of us are, I'm not going to go into this too much because I'm sure you've seen many presentations of this, but the right tree, right place. So like trees are just gigantic megaflora that just, can take up as much space as we'll give them in many cases. Like, live oak can go 120 feet wide. That's amazing. But we don't want to put them in a compact, dense development where there's power lines over that. So being aware of that, the little plant you buy at a store that is in a 5-gallon container is just the start of a long journey of that tree growing, right? So that's one of the things that we think about. We also think about site conditions. We think about, the soil texture, which is sand or another kind of sand here in Florida, right? Hardiness zone. You're lucky here where you're kind of out of that tension zone that I live in the center part of the state, where it's too hot for most temperates, but we still have a cold snap in the winter every couple of years that make the tropicals kind of, not so happy. That is a big thing. Drainage, if you have saline water that gets pulled up into your irrigation and things like that. These are all things that we have to consider these are long-term kind of chronic potential stressors if you have a mismatch between your site and your species. But I'm not going to talk about that today. I'm going to talk about something a little bit more aggressive, maybe not this aggressive, right? But we're going to talk about the things that require resiliency in plants, right? The more acute, stronger stresses that when you are raising a plant for multiple decades, they're going to come up against. And if you want that tree to live for a century or more, they're going to need to be able to handle these periodic major stresses in their life, right? And I was trying to think of how to, characterize these. And I don't know why, but the four horsemen, pestilence, war, famine, death, these kind of came in my head. It's the season, I don't know. But like as a good way to bin some of the major stresses that trees endure in their long lives. From a tree's perspective, pestilence is more pests and diseases, right? We live in a state that has many ports of entry for new diseases, new pests, all the different ports through our agricultural trade. One of our speakers from one of the researchers at UF shows that like things like hamster chew toys can bring over a new wood decay fungus or something that we have to worry about. All these things you don't think about in global trade that we're at the front line here because of where we live. Also invasives, this is war. War for a tree is fighting over scarce resources, the scarcest one being light, water being the next one, right? So they are fighting each other, and often we bring in an opponent, an enemy that outguns our native flora, right? And I'll show you why that is and how we can avoid it. We talk about famine, right? Famine for a tree would be a limiting environment. Being shadowed out in like a tunnel in a downtown setting, being cramped for space below ground. We just don't have access to long-term stores of water because you have a small volume of soil. These are the things that when times get tough, a tree won't have the resources to draw on what it needs to survive in prolonged droughts or things like that. And then for death, I just went with hurricanes because I wanted to put hurricanes in here. They can be pretty dramatic, pretty catastrophic, especially when they get to the higher category storms, where everything gets leveled from trees to houses, right? So we'll start with pests and diseases. I'm not going to give you any if you're expecting a bunch of pictures of really pretty trees that are going to be amazing for all these things, that's not what I'm going to give you. This presentation is pretty much a bunch of resources that you can draw on to make more informed decisions as you go forward and want to plant in your yard. I'm going to talk about pests and diseases. There is an amazing diversity of woody plants in this world. Recently, actually about 3 years ago, one of those papers came out where like the byline for researchers was like this long on the paper with just I think there was like 50 or 60 authors on this paper, right? And what it was all of the kind of herbarium and arboretum kind of curators around the world got together and tried to come up with their best guess of how many species there are in the world. It's one of those questions where it's really simple to ask, like how many species are there, and incredibly hard to answer. And need a global team like scouring their collections to kind of get at it. Within North America, they found that in all the collections they had 8,600 different species cataloged, right? And they realized that they don't have everything, right? They don't have everything cataloged. So they estimate that there's 2,400 species out there that they still have not found, mostly in Central America, but still, mostly in the tropical areas as well, So there is a lot of diversity out there, but do we see it in our urban environments? I do a tree assessment, ecological assessment for the city of Tampa every 5 years. And in that assessment, we catalog all the species we find in random plots throughout the city. In our last, in one of our last assessments, we found 112 unique species within the city of Tampa. right? That sounds pretty good. It's not 10,000 or 11,000, wherever we saw right here. But, 112 sounds pretty dang good. Most of those were in residential property, right? It's the collector out there, the person who wants all the unique fruit trees or native something or other that they really wanted that is not in, mainstream, maybe they got it through a garden club or whatever. We're seeing all that diversity in the residential areas. The problem with that number, you just go with richness, which is what that is, the count of species available, is it's very unbalanced. Many of those species we found only once or maybe twice. So, in fact, 4 species, live oak, laurel oak, cabbage palm, and cypress, make up over about half of the leaf area in the entire city of Tampa, right? And if you see that, half of it's 4 species, 2 of those species are in the same genus. They're both oaks, right? So if you get something that attacks oaks, you're losing a big chunk of your urban forest, a big chunk of the canopy that's providing all the benefits that we rely on. So, well, what about other areas? We did an inventory for the county, Hillsborough County. We looked at 150 parks. We geo-referenced all their assets, like the pickleball courts and all that stuff, and then all the trees as well. And we did risk ratings for all the trees so they could do some sort of master risk management plan. One of the bigger risks that they weren't even thinking about when they started this project was their dependence on live oak. Out of 11,000 trees that we inventoried across all these different parks, 40% are live oak, right? One species, 40%. Oak wilt comes, if it ever does get here, that is a problem for everyone who's using these resources and is wanting a little respite from the sun midday. It's a problem for the county for if they have to deal with major, a removal operation over and over again. They need to it's a great species, really resilient to a lot of things at the moment, but every species has its limitations. I did a survey with my friend Richard Howard. He's, Heather, you might have got that 45-page survey this year around. He sends it every couple of years. And one of the questions in that massive survey is, what are the 6 most common species in your city? And what percentage of your urban forests do these represent? And we found that on average, 6 species account for 60% of the urban forests in all different regions, right? And in some places like the Midwest and Northeast, one general, like oaks only or maples only, could be as much as 1/3 of their urban forest. Why do we have such limited diversity? There's a lot of decisions. I showed you a couple: the soil type, the hardiness zone, there's all these biological limitations that dictate what species can be found here. We're not getting Sitka spruce here in Florida, right? Like they are in Alaska. They just won't make it. But then we have production limitations, right? Like, can the growers find the seed source? Can they get it to propagate? Can they get it to grow nice? Does it grow fast? Because if you have one species that takes 7 years to grow to 2 inches and one species that takes 5 years, and you get the same price, why are you spending 2 extra years of production growing the slower growing species, right? There's design limitations. Designers like certain things in their plants and they spec us. And then there's just, what do we even know? What do you know out here in the audience when you're looking to buy the next tree on your property? And we have so many different actors. We have growers, we have designers, we have landscape contractors that are doing the actual installation. And then we have urban foresters like Heather that are trying to manage at a bigger scale. And we don't always do the best job of contacting each other and working with each other, And because of that, we can get into these weird feedback loops where we're not always getting the diversity that we want, or people aren't telling the growers like, hey, it'd be great if we had new species beyond bald cypress, what else? Magnolia, live oak, you name it, right? And even our designs we really love the same thing repeated over and over again, right? It's a design trend. But the problem is those design trends set us up for failure. Anyone from the Northeast or the Midwest originally will be familiar with Dutch elm disease, right? Dutch elm disease came over from Europe. Elms were loved for their iconic vase-like shape. You see that in the middle picture. And they were just a tough tree. Like a lot of our riparian trees are trees that are along river beds. They handle compacted soils, low oxygen soil environments. They handle a lot of abuse, and we favor them. And this one did it like a champ until it didn't anymore. Until the European bark beetle started transferring a fungal disease that made the the elm hyper overreact and start killing itself off with its own compartmentalization strategy, right? So we learned from that. That was a bulletproof species. It wasn't bulletproof after the European elm beetle came. So we'll find a new bulletproof species, right? We're going to go all in on ash. Ash isn't as pretty, but it's super resistant to everything. It's a super tough tree. It's common throughout North America. Let's go all in on ash and replant and rebuild. Well, we see that emerald ash borer hit in my lifetime, and now we have major losses of ash. And you can see this in aerial photos. Milwaukee in Wisconsin, they do aerial photos every 10 years. You can see that in 1963, they were probably at peak canopy when their elms were their greatest. And then they just never recovered, even though they have active planting, because they went all in on one species and then they went in on ash again. And every time you get a foothold, the new invasive comes in. And we're not alone in this. We're not immune to it in Florida, right? This is I-4 interchange. This is like the way you go in Tampa on the way to pay homage to the mouse in Orlando. FDOT planted row after row of date palms in part of their Bold initiative. 2015, April, December 2015, lethal bronzing, formerly Texas Phoenix palm decline, but Texas didn't like that, so now it's lethal bronzing. Hit June 2016. So we're looking like, whoop, I went too fast. There we go. About a year later, one tree that kind of knows it's dead, another one in the background who's still unaware, oblivious to the danger it was in. And then 2019, they're replanting this is the same intersection. I couldn't get a good picture of this, all Washingtonias, because Washingtonias are resistant to lethal bronzing. But every time you say something's resistant to lethal bronzing, we find a case where it has it, right? So we'll see. Yeah. So how do we select for tree for pest resistance? You need to know what's already out there in your community, right? In the broader stakes. And then you need to know how much of that you're willing to lose. A rule that's been thrown out there by the National Arboretum is 10, 20, 30. No more than 10% of a given species in your community, 20% of a given genus, and 30% of a given family. That's a rule that can be adapted to your own tolerances, right? If you think losing 10% based on a given species is too much, you can make it 5, 15, or 5, 10, 15, right? Whatever you want to do. But by having diversity at those three levels, you take care of the really noxious species-specific things, and you get a little handle on some of the broader pests and diseases out there that can hit more than one species. Avoid species with a known pest problem. And, if you can find a species that isn't in Eurasia, right? If it's not an oak, not an elm, something that, if it's on that supercontinent and it probably has a disease we haven't experienced yet here in North America, right? You know how everything picks on Australia? Well, we're not as big as Eurasia. So if there's oaks or elms or maples there that have a disease, that thing can get over here and then we could be susceptible. So things like Kentucky coffee tree or maybe gumbo limbo, something that's like not represented over there would be a better bet, right? To find out what those species are and which ones have resistances, We have a Florida tree guide that is put together by my colleague Ryan Klein at the University of Florida. He's drawn all the fact sheets that you've seen from the university and has a searchable database for you to find things that will fit in your backyard, right? Invasives. I won't go too much into this. This isn't an area of expertise for me. Again, this is the warfare. This is plants fighting for plants, other plants for survival. I want to say this though, when people are looking to produce a new species, they want something that grows quickly, produces abundant seed if possible, so you don't have to like keep going to the source, right? Has no special germination requirements. You're not like scarifying it with sandpaper, you're not, or acid, you're not chilling it to get it to break dormancy, and it has few pests or diseases. Well, guess what? These are all really key traits of invasive plants. And because of that, FLIPSI, the Florida Invasive Plant Council, think that 2/3 of all invasives in Florida have come from ornamental production, right? We're bringing stuff in. So, you know, if you have a native tree, you can't invade what it's already native in, right? Like that's just the definition. That's one key reason to use natives. But if you're going to go non-native, which I think there is a case for that in some really tough urban environments, make sure it's not invasive, right? So there's like the Florida Invasive Species Council. They have an up-to-date list of all the invasive species. So when you're looking to select something, make sure it's not on this list, right? And you can find that here. This PowerPoint will be available for everyone later on, so you can scan all these codes later, right? Or my university has what we call IFAS assessment, where we also look at invasives. We have a very similar rating system, and we are looking to make sure that anything from your flowers and your grasses to your trees are not going to be a problem in your area. There are some things that are invasive down here, a lot of things that are invasive down here that are not so problematic in the north, just because of temperatures and things like that. So having that level of regional data is really important. And again, you can look this up later on. You'll have the slides at your disposal. Living in environments. So this is the famine, right? This is real estate comes at a premium in urban areas, and everything takes up space from utilities to houses to trees, and they're all vying for that space, right? Right now, this is a case, I've seen this in cities where you have a conflict between hardscape and trees, and the tree's winning in this case, right? Until we fight back and we level out that sidewalk, and then we've cut off half the root system of that tree and stressed it, water stress, and then predispose it to windfall in a hurricane, right? And if you have a neighbor who has a mobility issue and you've seen them try to get around with something like this, you understand why we have the laws we do to make our sidewalks passable to folks that have scooters or wheelchairs or what have you. It's no fun to see them struggle, right? And this pops up quite a bit in Florida. We have these really compact developments. We have really small planting spaces out front, pushing everything to limit the biggest house possible on the smallest lot possible to maximize profit, tax revenues, whatever. And then we try to put trees in there too, right? And then, you know, the developer walks away, project looks great. 8 to 10 years later, every single sidewalk's open. And we've had cases, this is from the Tampa Bay Tribune, that shows how old this is. They're no longer a paper, but this neighborhood had 2,000 oaks, they removed it once. And I hear more and more of this, where it was like either continuously shave roots or just get rid of the problem and replant. So, you know, we've done some work to kind of address this. One of the things we looked at is a paper from Minnesota where people were looking to see if they could predict how far the roots would grow out based on the diameter of the tree. And why that's important is the tree diameter, like chest height right here, is a very common measurement with lots of data behind it. So we can use that to do all sorts of things like Heather can see how big her cities, the oaks in Naples typically get. And then she knows how wide the roots can typically grow and figure out what planting spaces are required for the species in the city based on how they generally fare, right? And she has inventory data where she can do that. So we're taking that top red line, which is a common measurement, trying to predict where the roots flare out, which is not a common measurement, so that we can make better planting guidelines. And amazing. It's a very tight relationship. I'm not going to say much before that, but it's tight across a bunch of different species in like a similar range. So we're able to make some pretty simple guidelines for planting based on the maximum size we'd expect. So here's an example. You can, if you have an 8-foot buffer, so if you can figure out what that maximum flare distance is, which is what we're doing based on diameter, and then you add 4 feet on each side to account for the roots that are still big but below the surface, we have our buffer width, which we can use for management. And where we get the maximum diameters is what we did is we looked at the champion tree registry to see how big trees can get in Florida to show the absolute maximum. So here we have a red maple. The maximum flare on a red maple is 7 feet. So if you added 8 feet to that, you would need 15 feet to make sure that that tree, that champion, would not influence any hardscape, right? That's great. Not every tree is going to be a champion, as we know. Parents know that with their, and all that stuff. That one's going to be a champion, but you can also scale based on what you expect. So, maybe 16 feet or 15 feet is the maximum for red maple, but you'd be happy if you got halfway there, right? Well, if you want it only to be halfway, they need 12 feet of spacing, right? Or maybe you'd be happy even if it made just a quarter of the way to the maximum potential based on our champion tree list. 10 feet's all you need for red maple to prevent any kind of conflict. And you can also say, like, you know what, that's great. I only have, 6 feet, 8 feet max. You can also use these equations to figure out how long you have until you have to replace all the trees and sidewalks, right? Either way, it works. So we put together a fact sheet for this. This will help you. It has common native species in Florida. So you can see, okay, this is how much space I have. About how big can I fit it? Like, what's the biggest tree I can fit in this space, right? To avoid that conflict, to avoid that famine of resources below ground. And, if your tree isn't on here, but it's kind of similar to that, that's good enough, right? It grows about the same size of this magnolia and this magnolia. You're fine, right? It's better than nothing. We also, I love this title. We called it the tripping point, which is the point in which even like a space is even too small for the smallest of trees. Where we wanted to see like what crepe myrtles and Simpson stoppers, at what point do they become problematic? And we need to do a fact sheet on this one. We have not done this one yet, but get that list for all of these. But you could look at this paper, which is open access, and if you know a little math, you can figure out what you could fit in your own property. Lastly is the death, right? The hurricanes. So the annual hurricane damage in the continental US is 17 billion. I had the pleasure of talking with a risk manager for the largest insurer in the country over the weekend. We just happened to be on the same Girl Scout camp trip with our kids. And we were just talking about this, and I'm just like, so what is it? So is it really that there are more storms more frequently, or is it that we just have more people living in prone areas? And lo and behold, as I expected, it's both, right? So it was good to hear that kind of validation from someone who works with the risk on a daily basis, right? And so we will have to deal with this more and more, at least if the current trends continue, with what we've been seeing. a predecessor of mine, she was the dean of research when I first started here, Mary Durier. They're in the 2004 and 5 hurricane season when we had like 7 storms across the state. She had a field day just getting data sets from cities and interviewing arborists to see what species made it and which ones didn't fare so well in the various intensity storms that crossed the state, right? And with that, she came up with some ratings that were high, medium, low, and low as far as wind resistance is for 145 trees and palms. And all these data sets, this list is open access if you want to look up original papers, but we have since updated this. So when we've worked with other like City of Tampa quite a bit. And one of the things we noticed is that they have a ton of native species that they want to plant in the area. Their coverage of wind ratings was 60%. So there were a lot of things that they didn't have wind data for. They have this Tampa matrix where they have things like drought tolerance, wind tolerance, salt tolerance, all this stuff that you can look if you're trying to find a tree in your city. So we did a big, massive study. We looked at all the research across the United States and beyond, and found 5,000 studies that we whittled down to 64 unique cases where they had really good data on not only what species fell down in the storm, but what species survived. Because honestly, we're trying to recreate the latter. We want tree species that are going to make it. We found that tree size was really important. So unfortunately, the bigger the tree, the more likely it is to fail, because once you get above your peers, you're more, in the wind, right? Tree species, it was almost always an important factor, and we're trying, like, we look at things like wood density and different traits about trees, trying to figure out what the secret sauce is. But there's just something that's not being captured in that rudimentary data that is encompassed in species itself that makes it really easy to say, this species is better than this one's that. But trying to find like overarching trends within that is harder, right? Where storms are common, like Florida or subtropical Japan, nativeness matters. Like, imagine that if you have evolved for tens of thousands of years in a hurricane-prone area, you're more likely to be able to weather that. Amazing, right? Take science. Things like Canada and North and Central Florida, where they're hit less often, that meant less of a difference, right? And then, like, this is where the hurricanes hit, right? So if you're a species coming from any of these hot zones, chances are you're pretty resistant to, you have a higher likelihood compared to a similar species that is not. We still have water oaks, we still have laurel oaks, right? They have a different strategy for colonizing the area. And we came up with close to 500 ratings now based on that global search. We couldn't recreate her method completely because she didn't have like what went into high, medium, low. But what we did is we made a model and recreated her ratings using machine learning, so that we have the same ratings as her, based on things like survival rates and stuff like that. So we created a guide for FEMA that was improving hurricane resilience. It has all these species risk ratings if you're interested in it. Luckily I saved it on ResearchGate because it was yoinked off the internet in the last couple of months. Probably had the climate change in the text. But it is available at this link right here. We also have a full wind resistance guide that we pretty much republished this more for a scientific audience. This is more of a guide. This is probably useful for folks managing trees. But the same data, the same tables are in this paper for the science community, and that's openly available as well. So, and I guess the next step for us is we want to look at salt tolerance because we're getting a lot of flooding, a lot of inundation, and there's even less information on salt tolerance in the literature. So, yeah. And with that, if you select well, do your best. You may not be guaranteed an oak of this stature or a tree of this stature in your yard. But at least you're not stacking the decks against your newly planted tree, right? Every tree has a place, just may not be in Naples, right? So, with that, thank you very much for your time. And yeah. Yes.
It was a fascinating presentation. What I see being here 10 years ago, our community was told by the county, wasn't complained. But a lot of the information that we had to plant is directly against what we suggested. Has that ever worked when you give an example that you say, hey, these are not the best trees to plant, and you not that civil this work?
I mean, I don't think I listed any species. Like, what would be an example of like something that was contrary to what I said? Like, just for
the oaks.
Okay.
The oaks are invasive in terms of the sidewalks, the streets, and the sewer pipes. And plus they crowd the neighbor.
Yeah.
And the roofs. They're not the best tree to plant, but we have hundreds of them in our front yard or in our.
No, yeah.
It just doesn't make sense.
It's the number one produced, it's probably the most produced tree in Florida, right? So that's, so you could have these grand visions of like, I'm not gonna plant oaks, but then when it comes down to like a developer or someone trying to find trees to plant, they only find the oaks because it's like, it is so easy to propagate. They grow well, they have a historic market. So there's a lot of things I need to shift to get away from oaks.
But if in Collier County, if you want to take down the tree, there's a man who's in charge of issuing permits to remove trees. So it's like double red tape. Some of these trees.
Yeah, I mean, I
don't know what else you would give me, but I just would like to see a town go take some of your data and say, hey, you're killing the residents, you're killing
yeah, I mean, because we inherit the problems of the past, right? So, and that's the thing is like the decisions that we're living through right now for like these big trees happened 10, 20, like you said, years ago. So change is slow with trees, unless there's a hurricane, that'll change pretty fast. Unfortunately, yes.
Sure, just briefly overall, like tree barriers.
Yeah.
In areas, particularly in the environment. Just an overall satisfied are they applicable?
I think that, yeah, they have a potential for tree barriers are like you have roots that are lifting sidewalks, roots that are in your driveway, roots that are hitting your foundation, you're worried about it. I don't think they're needed for many foundations because we're doing research on this. We're trying to figure out like how much pressure a root can actually lift on something, right? And the typical foundation is too heavy for a tree to lift, right? Sidewalks lift that no problem, right? So what a barrier would do, a physical barrier, the one that's like 18 inches deep, like the plastic one, the deep root one, what it does is it forces the root down and then it slowly grows back up. And by the time it gets up to the surface where it can cause a problem again, it's cleared the sidewalk, right? That's a cool thing to do. Probably not as effective if it's going to an asphalt driveway, right? Because it's going to hit that again. So I think sidewalks, they have a lot of potential. If the tree's already causing the problem, you have to cut roots to even install it, and then whatever regrows, and in our experience, most things will regrow. That'll be the stuff that goes just further.
Sounds like infection. Very utility.
Yeah, for utilities, you could wrap. There's hormonal barriers. I think those would have like you don't want those usually in Florida because of the sun degradation, or degradation. But underground, if you wrap the ones that are hormonal, that'll keep the roots from growing just from hormones. That might be useful for pipes and things like that, Yes.
The trees you plant today, so Florida, that would be the correct tree, future based upon the weather,
Mhm.
i.e. live oak. And stand intense temperatures over a long period of time. So you can see not sit on the mines of live oaks in southern Florida over a period of time.
Yeah, that is the rub of working with an organism that's gonna outlive you, is you have to think ahead. And I call it tree time. It's just like, we think about 5-year windows and we're thinking ahead, but yeah, anyway, you're great point. And one more question.
Will be planting street trees in very compacted soil. There are any methods to make that better.
Yeah, so my predecessor at Gilman, he's got some specifications on like a UF website where it shows if it's like a big long area, you can actually do some deep tillage and incorporate compost, and that'll be a really good solution. If the trees are already there, then that'll be more like there's some work from Bartlett Labs where they do radial trenching with an air excavator, break up that, put compost in there, and have avenues for the soil to remediate itself. There are options out there, you know, but they need to be specified in. Otherwise, you're just replanting a tree in concrete again. You know. Yes. Wait.
The paper that the co-author
Yeah.
Showed all those charts with various free spaces that were needed to accommodate roots. But what was not in that chart was any reference to 1, 2, or 3 standard deviations from saying, here's what a champion is, and here's one that's 20%, and here's one that's 50%. So how do you look at the likelihood of having a champion, 3 standard deviations from the average against what the average tree is?
Yeah, and that's the problem is like, what is the average tree, right? So like,
You use the reference to the average tree in the chart.
yeah, for our population, right? So which was Tampa, which was they were like random plots within the state of Tampa, right? I did not say how far off the so because we had good data for like maybe whatever 5 species in that paper, but when I was making the guide, I'm like, how am I going to figure this out for like the maximum potential for all species across Florida, right? And that's why I went with the champion tree numbers, and it worked back to like 75% of that, 50% of that. Yeah. A champion is a lottery winner, right? Champion is the genetic, it's like the tree lottery winner. Other trees were hit by lightning, other trees were shaded out as acorns or consumed by, millions died for that one that you see that is, yeah. So
In terms of applying the guideline, say the champion, when you go up to Ocala and look at a champion sitting on the field up there, the horses around it, they might be 60, 70, 80 inches on diameter.
yeah.
But in terms of the guideline, for saying, if I put this in my urban environment, I can expect them to be what, 60%, 50%?
Yeah, like that's hard too because the state has cities that are relatively young too, right? So like you look at like the villages, right? Whatever's average there is not reflective of what an average would be in an older city like Orlando or so like that's the rub. This is such a dynamic development area. Trying to find the average is tough, so. So I avoided the question altogether.
Okay, hold on. I'm gonna hold your question. So sorry. We are gonna go into the next one just so we have time for everybody, but remember it and we'll have time later. Speaking back to Jane's question about plantings, we actually are gonna have a wonderful speaker here, Clark Ryals. He is the senior forester at the Caloosahatchee Forestry Center, and he oversees 3 counties, Lee, Collier, and Hendry County. He's responsible for everything with forestry. So from rural forests to urban forests, so we decided we'd bring him here to talk to you guys about forests.
Thank you. I'm getting up a little cold right now, so hopefully my hacking won't bother you too much. But yes, we're going to learn today about planting trees. This PowerPoint actually comes from Ed Gilman. We just talked about Ed Gilman and his expertise and pretty much everything trees. I pretty much just took his PowerPoint, changed it up a little bit and made it for this. So if you want to know exactly how they plant it and how it's done, this is the guru for doing it. Pretty much Ed Gilman and Tracy Parton. So we're going to use his presentation on how to do it, and it's going to be a 10-step process. So as we all know, people think planting a tree, just dig a hole, shove it in, right? We're done. Put the dirt over, hey, we planted a tree. This is going to show you how much more complex it can be than that, and how much we really want to get to a big status, huge tree, actually do what it's supposed to do in the environment. We need to kind of follow these guidelines to make sure we get the best one possible. So number one is Andrew, Mr. Koeser talked about looking up, wondering what kind of tree right space. You want to make sure you look up before you dig this hole, right? Because we don't want to have trees that look like this, where you have to have a big power line come through and just cut and destroy that big, beautiful tree. So a lot of it's going to be choosing the right tree for the right place. So if you are going to be planting under a power line or near a house, make sure you choose a tree that's smaller, a tree that can fit in that area. Maybe not something like a massive oak tree, right? You see that a lot in these cities where we want to put oak trees in these tiny little islands in these, parking lots like Target or Publix. And they're never going to, they're only going to live there 17 years. That's like the average of like a tree in our native environment. That's it, 17 years. So we're not really planning past that. So we've got that concrete right there. And when it gets to that age, we just rip the tree out. And what do? We plant the same tree in the same spot. Didn't really learn anything from that. So we got a little bit of ways of doing to try to get better if we want to have these kind of trees in these really beautiful areas. So first thing before you're going to plant it, look up, make sure you know where you're planting it. Number two is digging that hole. Okay. When you think about the hole, if you're digging like a 3-gallon pot or a 7-gallon pot, we're not having to dig that big of a hole. But if you're in a municipality and you're planting 25-gallon trees, that's a big hole. You're going to plant in the ground. So the biggest way to make sure you're planting it correctly, I usually say, is to try to measure the size of that pot. So as you see here, we're measuring how deep they want to plant it and how wide. And pretty much you want to start that hole and dig it at that level right there. That's what we're looking at, trying to get it at that level. But what we really want to try to do really is try to make that hole 1.5 to 2 times the size of that pot. So you give that root a lot of space to move into. We're trying to get those roots to pretend like they're not in that pot anymore, where they've been growing for years and years in a nursery setting, and then move out into the average soil, okay? Another thing you'll notice about that picture, 2 nights at the depth, is it doesn't need to be too deep. Too many people want to plant these trees deep. They want to put it in that hole and bury it over. We want to make sure it's at least 1 to 2 inches above soil when you put that thing in the ground. That's going to be very, very important. So those are kind of like when you're digging that hole, those are going to be the 2 biggest things I would say from this, is make sure it's wide enough and that it's not too deep. Next thing we want to do is find that topmost root. We're talking about that root flare that's on the bottom of that tree. That's where the roots should be at level on the ground, right? Too many times you'll see in the nursery where that's buried way down, sometimes 2 or 3 inches underneath that soil layer. So if that's true, you need to dig down in there and really find that topmost root. That's where you want that to be on the start of the soil, or actually probably still 1 inch above soil from that root right there. Another thing you want to notice here is actually the quality of that root ball. These root balls pretty much need to be able, if you're in a pot like that, you need to be able to slide it off easily. If that pot doesn't want to come off for some reason, that means those roots are probably bound in there and are really pushing on the edge of that pot and will not allow it to come out. You can still fix some of those things by what we're going to show later about trimming. But at that point, you probably know that tree is already going to have root issues if you can't get that pot off. So if you're buying these in the store, you're going to Lowe's, you're going to your native garden center, spend some time with these trees. Pick them up out of the pot. Make sure they're going to slide out good. Make sure you're buying good quality stock, because some of those things can be solved before you ever get to the planting site. And you're showing again, find that topmost root. Reason why we don't want to have that extra soil on top is because it's going to smother our plant. Pretty much the root system, a lot of people think about this, but the root system deals a lot with oxygen transfer. Not just the leaves, not just the bark. The roots are a big component too. And they get a lot of times overlooked. We put them next to sidewalks, don't really think about the root system. Because when you think about a big tree, pretty much you can look at the inverse of the canopy. It's pretty much what that root system needs to look like underground. So if you've got a 120-foot canopy, you've probably got a 120-foot canopy of roots underneath that ground too that are going to be there. So depending on the size of the tree, it's going to depend on how much those roots really matter. It's a good picture here of the root quality of the root ball. As I talked about before, you really want to make sure that pot is really full of roots. You really want it to slide off really nice. If it doesn't slide out, you'll see the one on the right-hand side. That means they probably just stepped it up right then. They went from like a 3-gallon pot to a 7-gallon pot. And you can tell that by when you go to pick that pot, a tree out of the thing, and that soil just falls out, it doesn't stay in the form. That means it's not ready. It needs to stay in that pot for a little bit longer to let that root system fully engulf in that area. That's when they step it up. But a lot of times that's when you'll find the deal. That's when they're like, oh, we've got 2 for 3, if you want that time. And that's why sometimes you won't have as good a quality stock. Also, look at all that extra excess dirt on top. It's not what we want to see, and that's pretty much that's showing. And by doing that, that really kind of restricts the amount of root growth that can go underneath it by having all that extra soil. So what do you want to do? You want to get your hands in there and pull all that soil out of the root ball, take it all off. And, another thing I'm kind of want to go back to is when you're digging this hole, a lot of people just start putting that soil all over the place, right? You're just digging a hole and you don't really know where that soil's going. That soil's got to go back in the hole. So what I usually try when I'm doing these kind of plantings is usually plant a tarp or something over to put all that soil on, because you're going to need all that soil again. And if you've got thick St. Augustine grass, trying to get soil out of that grass is almost like a fool's game. So really hard to do. So make sure you got to keep your soil, because you're going to need it later. So that extra soil that's going to come on top, just pull it out and put it in with your extra soil right there. It's going to really help out the tree. Next thing we're going to look for is the circling roots. So as I talked about before, these plants have been growing in these pots for years. A lot of these things that you're going to find in a nursery will say it's about probably multiple years per pot. So if you get like a 7-gallon tree, that's probably been growing in that pot or stepping up for multiple years, 3 to 5 years probably, just to get that 7-gallon tree. Some of these other trees, if you're wanting to go 25, 40 gallon, that could be like 10, 12 years of growth just to get to there. So by making sure the root system is good on that, inside that pot is what we're looking at. So roots won't know that they can't get out of that area, right? They're in a plastic pot. They're going to keep growing in that plastic pot till they hit the edge. And when they hit the edge of a round corner, what do? They turn, right? It's a round corner. So they keep going around and around. So what you want to do is find that one and start clipping them out. You'll see on that top root flange that comes out, you'll start to see these smaller roots that come off of these structural roots, we call them. And these smaller roots are ones you need to kind of clip. You're going to kind of look down in there and clip them. But it's really easy once you slide off the pot. This is where I usually kind of get the slide. Is you want to slide that pot off and you're going to see all the roots that are on that edge. That's a good looking root ball right there, where you don't have any massive roots sticking out, but you've got a lot of these smaller roots that are starting. When you get to this like this, what I usually try to do is just get a pair of clippers, get you a pruning saw, get you a really sharp shovel you're digging with, and slice off those roots, okay? A lot of people get real scared when they get the roots. They're like, I'm going to hurt the tree with the roots, because I'm told they're very important. The roots are like hair. You got to cut them to grow them, right? The more you cut your hair, the faster it grows. Roots are the same way. They will grow within just a few days, just right back again. So by cutting them out and getting them in there early on, you're going to set that tree up for a lot of success. So just hack at them is what I say. Get it over that hole, cut those roots off real good. And once you get it in the hole, really try to pull them out and string them out so they're not thinking they're sitting in the hole. Because if you don't, you get this. And I see this a lot of times going to nurseries, sometimes at Lowe's, Home Depot. I don't like usually going to those places anymore, but you'll find this where you've got a 3-inch caliper tree that's been sitting in probably about a 7-gallon pot for probably 2 years too long. That should have been stepped up to probably a 15-gallon pot a long time ago. It wasn't. And now you see those roots inside circling, and that tree never really knows it got out of the pot. And at this point, to really fix something like that, if I was to keep all that soil on, you're looking at having to do some major issues with trimming and cutting, and then probably having to massively water and stake up to try to save a tree like this. Probably at this point, though, that's just a cull. That's what we call, just throw that one away and start off with a new one if you find something like that. So at this point, hard to fix that, but it's not impossible. But the problem is you don't really notice any of these issues till they've already been planted in the ground for 3 or 4 years, maybe you have 5 years. You get a big wind event like a hurricane come through or a small burst tornado, and you go down and all the street trees are all leaning one side, right? They're all tipped. And what you'll do is you'll come down and you'll notice, and I'll dig around the bottom of the ground, and you'll notice all these circling roots where you really look at that tree at the bottom down there and you can really see the root mass is only about where the pot was. You can really just see it right there. It never really got out of that room. That root mass should be filling up this entire area at this point with that size tree. That tree is 15, 17 feet tall, already got a 12-foot crown. So like we need massive roots should have already been in there. And at this point, there's probably not much you can do to save a tree like this. You can do some major tree spading, you can do some major staking and try to set it up, but you're probably going to spend a lot more money on it. And that's where cities like this are just going in and ripping them out and planting something new. But the problem with that is things are really expensive. Like we're showing that intersection with all those date palms. Those palms are like $10K a piece. And you saw all of them died, and that's a lot of money for the city to just toss away $100,000 and try to go with something else, right? And what do? We get a different one, but they're also $8,000 a piece, the other one. So a lot of these things are very, very expensive. And I go into HOAs all the time, and people are wanting to get rid of their oak trees, their palms, and then you start explaining like how long it's going to take to get this tree back. And they're like, yeah, you'll be dead and your grandchildren will be here, and that still will be like that. So like we've got to try to maintain the limbs, do other things around it, rip up the concrete, put impervious pavement. Don't need pavement in some places. I'm always up for this stuff. Like, why do we get so obsessed about pavement? Who cares? Make it dirt, you can do all these things, but we gotta kind of work on those things to try to really work with that landscape. Unfortunately, a lot of times the hardscape wins. Next thing we want to do is place the tree in the hole. Sounds pretty obvious, right? But what we want to do is, a lot of people, when I see them grab those trees, you want to grab it by the bark, you want to grab it by the trunk, right? You want to grab 2 to 3 in your hands and walk to the car on by the trunk. What you're doing, you're putting a lot of due stress on that actual trunk of the tree. And so you'll see here, obviously, like a 3-gallon pot, not so big a deal, but if you're carrying a 25-gallon or something big, that's when you want to try to go towards like heavy equipment. You'll notice they have it all bundled up here and burlap and bag and burlap here to try to really make sure you're handling it correctly. But handling that tree and making sure you get out of the pot correctly could be another big thing. Try to make sure you get in that hole. Now you put the tree in the hole, right? We've got it in the hole. We're now getting somewhere else, moving along. Next thing we want to make sure we want to do is we talk about how to get that certain depth. That's going to be a real big important thing here. Biggest thing is, you see on that thing is it's better to plant it a little high than a little deep. I have to tell people this all the time. Higher is better than deep, but people look at it and they're like, the roots are going to die up there, right? And you're like, no, that's what it's supposed to do. They need that root flare to get into the ground. Like go look at any oak tree and you're going to see that root flare growing up above the soil of the surface. If it's a big tree, even pine trees have a root flare. All these types of trees are going to have some kind of root flare. So you need to be able to follow where it's been growing and how it wants to grow in the environment. Obviously here, you want to make sure if it's in a burlap sack, like if you're buying it for like a community and you're buying big quantities of larger trees, this is where you're going to make sure that even though it's in that burlap, you want to pull that stuff all down and away to find out where the original root is. And they're showing here right there with his shovel, that's probably where the first real root is in it. And you can see it's got probably, 3 to 6 inches of soil on top of that. It's all got to come off before it goes in that hole. So put it in the hole, obviously too deep, right? Oh no, we can't fix it. Well, you got all that soil you had on the side, put it all back in the hole. So this is where you kind of get to where, depending on how big the tree is, how many times you want to keep lifting it in and out of the hole is going to depend on, how much soil you want to put in. So I usually dig the hole less deep and I start putting it in, and then I work to like I want to get to that depth instead of spending all my energy digging. Once again, a lot different with a 3-gallon pot versus a 25. You're digging a 25-gallon hole, you got to be ready to dig. Especially if you're not doing it with any kind of equipment. If you're just doing post hole diggers or a shovel like I do, the less digging, the better. I promise you. You don't want to be digging extra hole here because you probably got 12 more to plant. Things we're going to talk about, like planting it too deep. Here's the main reasons why they talk about that. Soil intercepts water meant for the root ball, causing the roots to dry out. People don't really think about that. I go all the time to these communities and they're like, well, our trees get water. They're getting irrigated. And I'm explaining like that water is just for the grass and for the plants. Those trees are barely getting any of that irrigation water that your HOA is pumping out there all day, all night. That water's not meant for trees. It's just watering all the landscape around it because they're sucking it all up. You're not putting in like hundreds of thousands of gallons of water. You're doing it on a certain system. So you need deep watering to really get to those roots. And we'll get to that later with how to really make sure we get that. But obviously, again, we're going to talk about mulch going up against the root ball, but really the soil at this point, you want to get it off that root ball, move it off, make sure it's not too deep. Next thing is straighten that tree. This is kind of obvious. You want to stand back, make sure you get it as straight as possible. Because trees are phototropic. They're going to grow to the sun. You'll see in areas around like a parking lot where they're all swooping one way, and that's because of the big building on one side shading it out most of the day. And that's why your tree grows that way. Or I'll go to homeowners' houses and their trees are leaning way over the house. Like, I keep cutting it back and it keeps going over the house. I'm like, well, that's the only sunlight it has. Of course it's going to keep growing over your house because that's where everything else is shading around. You've got a 2-story building on one side or you've got a condo on the other side. We're trying to put these trees in areas that really don't want to go. So trying to get your tree as straight as possible so it grows in its maximum form is the best way to do it. Next thing we want to do is remove all those synthetic materials. Most of y'all, obviously a pot is what most of the homeowners are going to be dealing with. You want to obviously take that pot, slide off and get rid of it. But this is kind of more based on like if you're using a balled and burlap type tree we showed earlier, you want to make sure you get that burlap off the top of that tree because that burlap, even though it's a fibrous, it's natural material, it's still going to absorb water that needs to go into that root ball. So by rolling it down and removing it as much as possible is good. You don't have to remove the whole thing. The kind of article goes on to explain you don't have to remove all of it, but I'm of the belief that the more stuff you get off that root ball, the better off that tree is going to be. It doesn't have to go through anything else. But sometimes you'll see the synthetic burlap. That's that black, shiny burlap stuff you'll see like at a nursery that's growing on the ground, that black fabric. Sometimes I'll wrap them in that. If you leave it in that, we can have real big problems because that synthetic burlap, it's a plastic, right? So it allows small bits of like roots to go through, but it doesn't expand, right? Like plastic hits a certain expansion and then it won't allow it to go any farther. Whereas burlap, if it's going through those, they go through burlap, they just tear that burlap, right? We can tear burlap and burn it and move it. It rots in the ground. The synthetic won't. But it's the picture showing if you don't do that, what happens, and you'll see the tree produces lots of tiny fine roots, but nothing really big to hold that 6-inch caliper tree here in the ground. That could even be 8. Instead, we want to see is more like roots that look like that. You know, big old fat roots that are coming out of the ground, big structural roots that are locking this tree in the ground to really make it survive. In fact, this one's showing about wire baskets. Sometimes they come in wire baskets. I do see this in some of our HOAs I go into where they'll, you know, they have a problem because the landscape guy keeps getting his thing all banged up, and we realize, dig down and we see, oh, there's the wire basket that you keep hitting. That's why it's messing it up. Or they come out to grind the tree down and it tears the grinder up because it's smacked into that metal, you know, the teeth just rip off on that metal basket. So once again, if you can get the metal basket off, it's better, but it's not going to really, they're showing metal baskets don't really affect the growth of the tree. It's just more like when you got to remove it or you got to work around it, it becomes an issue. Next thing is you add the soil and the backfill. So that's what we're talking about, wanting to, you know, those areas that are concrete, right? We got the tree, and that we're planting it in an area like a big field, or we'll say like a school. You know, I go to a lot of schools and plant. And you know what they'll do to, you know, to build these areas is, well, if you ever watched any developments, they pretty much put that, you know, they clear all the land off and then they get steamroller out there and they roll it across and compact that dirt. They bring in more fill dirt and then they roll that steamroller across. They're packing that soil in so deep that the house won't settle and move, right? But now we want to come back and try to plant trees in that area that has literally fully compacted soil that's not meant to grow trees, it's meant to grow grass. So to really, if you have a yard that's like this, it sounds like your yard, this rock yard, this is probably why your trees aren't growing. So what you need to do is once you get that hole dug, now you can come around the edge of that tree. And I usually do like concentric rings. So go about 6 inches out from it and do an entire ring around the tree with your spade and shovel and push that soil back into the hole. Push it back toward, you're loosening that soil ball in between the hole you've already dug and that new ring. And if you got a big tree, let's say you're planting a 25-galloner, then I'd come back around another foot behind it and do another concentric ring around it. Because I'm trying to really break up all that area so those new roots that I'm wanting to grow can easily go into that area and start building that crown and locking that tree in the ground. So that's always a step a lot of people miss, especially when you're planting in compacted areas. Now you want to make sure you have to get it in. Now you want all that dirt you had off to the side. Now's the time to bring it back in. Now you want to, after you get it at that set height, you want to bring in all that soil, kind of loosely pack it around. This is one I kind of learned over time. We'd get the kids out, we'd stamp all this stuff down and get them in there and jumping on it, you know, and realized at the time that was actually leading back to the compaction problems and might have been some of the issues. So after looking at one of these, Ed Gilman's presentations and going and seeing and realizing the better way was to do what we call like watering in to backfill. And that's my new way of doing it. And pretty much you get a water hose, you bring it over the area and you just start shoving it into the dirt. Just plumb it down deep in there and let that water fill into all that area. And what this does, it kind of creates a slurry effect, as you can see here. And as that water soaks down in our sandy soil, it will just lock that tree in, like almost like concrete. And at this point, like sometimes you don't need to stake them at this point because they are so locked into that soil because that water, just you can imagine, it pulls down those capillaries, and that as the energy goes down, it just sucks it all together and just snacks it right in there. So really good way of really making sure when you're watering it in, good, but also without having to compact that soil with your feet and add in undue compaction. Because we still want some air pockets in there. Air is still good. We just don't want big voids of air pockets in there. And that's where roots will hit that air pocket and die underneath the soil. But all roots need air too. So this misnomer, we need to get all the air out of it, is kind of a misnomer. You don't need to get all of it out, but you need to get most of it. Now, our next step is ready for mulch. And you'll see in this good picture, I like how he has it here, where you can still see where that soil was from when it got planted in the pot and how much they had to dig down. Look at that, 2-3 inches down to the first root ball. And then you'll still see here with this nail, we're still 2 to 3 inches above the ground. So make sure after you slurried it in, that's why you want to go even higher, because as you slurry this stuff in, that's going to settle down into the dirt. And at this point, if you've already settled in and it's sucked down in lower, you've got to pull it back out and get that up again. So that's why I always say, make sure you get it higher than lower, because it is going to settle as we do this. Now we're into the mulch phase. Mulching is a big kind of, you know, a lot of people have different ways of doing it, but pretty much this is a really good way of showing to do. I don't know if you need a 8-foot circle around it. That's a pretty big area to mulch. But the more mulch you put around the tree, a larger area, the better chance we have for water inception and less competition. Because we talked about earlier, plants are competing with everything all the time. They're always fighting each other. And grass is one of our big competitors for water, right? Grass is pretty much like a big sponge we put out there. And the reason why we put it in all our yards is it sucks up all that water from the rain that's going to go out in the streets. So why not have a great absorber of water in our yards like green grass? In fact, you go in some of these areas, I'll go into like some HOAs where they do a string trimming, and that layer of like St. Augustine grass will be like that thick, like 4 inches above the ground, just sitting there. So getting in that, pulling that out of the way, away from the mulch ball, can really help out too. So you want to start with 3 inches on the outside, but you want to make sure you want to keep it off the main mulch ball. If you're going to do it over the root ball, you want to just do a little thin 1-inch area, not a whole lot. But a lot of people don't do enough. This is, most people aren't going to go to this stage. If you want to have a really good one like you see at universities or golf courses, notice that. These are big trees right here. That's probably a 12-inch caliper tree, maybe 10. It's already got a big canopy. So look at that. The mulch line is probably the exact same size as the canopy. And that's going to allow all that water to intercept that hits that tree, falls down through the canopy and glides down the bark to actually intercept the root ball instead of watering all your grass. We don't need that grass. Most grasses and trees don't like each other. I see that a lot of times. We're always fighting with grass and trees. We want the grass, but the trees keep killing it. No, so like just get rid of it. Get rid of it and make it mulching. It's a lot better. But if you don't do it, we get this other issue. I see this more times than not. We don't put enough. We put like a little block down there. And we think, yeah, that's good. And then we don't realize like how much competition those grass just goes right over the top of that mulch ball. And now we get the string trimmer guys come out there and they don't have time. They got 5 other jobs on the way and they're just doing their job and you whack all those sides of trees. And now they're injured and now it either can cull the tree, kill it, or at least retard the growth for multiple years before you're going to be able to fix that wound on such a small tree. Because a weed whacker on something like that little 1-inch thing is probably going to weed whack 75% of that bark around it. It's only going to have like 25% left just to move its flow and water stuff north and south. So adding more mulch helps out a lot and keeps obviously the lawn mowing equipment away from it. But the other end of the spectrum is the volcano mulching. We see that a lot too. We want to dump 2 bags of mulch on top and leave it. I'll go into areas all the time, HOAs, and see this, and I'm literally out there. I'm like, okay, get all this mulch all off the trees, and they just had their mulching crew come through, and they think that looks great. And I'm like, no, none of this looks great. It's all got to be completely changed up. And they're always like, what? And I'm like, yeah, this is not good. You need to move it all off. But you get the same way where you have so much mulch, and now you're out here trying to spray you're trying to keep the grass off of it. And now you just let the grass grow over the top of it. So what have we really done? Now we've got all this mulch on top that now is sucking up all that water as it dries out, and it's not getting to the root ball. And it also leads to a lot of rotting around that stem, right? This is imagine like, never taking your hand out of a glass of water. What do you think's gonna happen to your skin? It's just gonna slough off, right? Or you never change that Band-Aid. That's kind of the same aspect with the tree. So trying to get that off to let that trunk dry itself out, big time help. Next thing you want to do is add a berm. And this is really only as much important I see in like really compacted soil areas where like, we'll say in that, area, a schoolyard or something like that. It's really compacted because that water you'll see here on the top picture, it's just rolling off. That water is just not staying where it's supposed to. It's just going everywhere because that soil is real compacted and dry and not absorbing down. Most area here in Florida, as we talk about in South Florida, really sandy, right? We got sand upon sand upon sand upon sand. But if it's really compacted, it's going to be a problem. I used to make that berm out of soil, but after reading this a lot of times, it's showing that soil's not the best because if you make that soil root ball and it rains, where's all that soil go? Right back over the root ball, right? It just flows right back on top and we get all these torrential rains. So they suggest now, especially if you got, soil that's actually drawing down water, don't even worry with the berm. And in fact, if you do want to make a berm, just make it out of mulch. That's one of the best things they're showing to do here. Next thing you want to do is stake and prune. So here's your 3 different kind of staking methods you'll kind of see around most of your areas. Probably the most common one is you're going to see this one on the corner here. It's where they have the 2 lodge poles in the ground with that green fabric. They tie loosely around the tree, right? Unfortunately, a lot of times I'll see it where it's tied way too tight. And people think that that's really holding that tree in the ground. That tree's good. But what we don't really understand is you want that tree to move and flow with the wind, right? It'd be like you trying to hold your arm straight all day and hoping that arm's going to do right, That arm needs to like bend and move to get its full range of motion. In fact, these trees develop what we call like spring wood on each side, where they need to be able to bend and move. Otherwise, if it stays rigid, it might grow on one side too much and cause that tree to lean, and then you can't really get it out of it. So by tying it loose, most important. Also, the thing is, you see here, I always see this too, 1 year max. 1 year. I'll go into places and they had these things on for 3 years. I'm like, what are we doing with this tree? Like, why does it need 3 years? Like, maybe 6 months. But no one knew to take it off. Like, go to any gas station around, you'll see these still on there. No one knows to take them off. Like, no one told them, hey, you need to come back and pull these off after a year. Yeah, nope, but that's what we had issues with trees because there's no one coming back and doing these things. We got the job got done. And then there was the manager of the, the Culvers doesn't know to come out and take that off. He's the manager of Culvers. He's not know anything about trees. So I a lot of times I'm the guy with I got the pocket knife and I just go out there and I cut them off. I'm gonna take that thing off. And then lastly, what you want to do is prune, but we're not talking like big time pruning. We used to back in the day, if you took off this compensate for root loss is a big thing. If you took off 25% of the roots, you want to take off 25% of the crown to kind of match for it. I guess they've done a lot of studies that show that doesn't really do much. So what we're really trying to do is really remove the broken branches, right? From putting in the bed of your truck, dragging it out down the street, plopping in a hole. You're eventually going to get a few breaks. You want to trim those off now because the tree, like anything else, if you cut your hand and didn't heal it, it's going to heal, but maybe you need stitches to really make sure it gets good and tight instead of a jagged wound. So by cleaning off those trees, and you'll see it a lot in hurricane areas, like in your area where you get a hurricane come through, you want to trim off every single one of those little broken branches because all that extra area is not going to heal correctly, not going to get a good flush cut, and it's going to lead to disease coming back down into your tree. So that's really important. And also, hopefully you're buying Florida Fancy or #1 and you don't have to do any structural pruning. But this is a great time here too to look at your form. Do you have a forked top? Do you have an extra limb that sticks out way weird over here? This is where you can just cut it off right there and end it and start it off at a new because it's being brand new and planted. You've got a good canvas here to work with and kind of make it how you want. So that's when that's a good time to kind of trim a little bit there. Now we're going to finally kind of go to the last two things about establishment. And this is where watering comes in take. This is where I say, like, the people are like, well, we've got the irrigation system. That's fine. And I'm like, you need drip irrigation. You don't just need shrub heads. That's not really going to attack the problem, especially with watering these trees, because depending on the size of your tree is going to depend on how much water it needs. We're looking at, look at that, 2 gallons per inch truck per caliper on the root ball, 2 to 3 times a week. So we're looking at a lot of times, and I got a little thing here in a minute, like how much you need to do. But in our area, like you need to water a lot on these trees, a lot, especially if it gets bigger. Also on the mulch, you're not done just the first mulching. It's not over. You're going to have to go back and treat the weeds on that mulch because weeds will grow back over that mulch. You have to spray or cut those out. And then the last thing I always have is removing those stakes that they leave on there that I'll find out, they have a little bamboo stake with a little green tape on it, right? I'll find those in trees that are 15 years old and you can still see it in the tree, and it's grown all the way around it. But those are the big things that just left on. They think it came from the nursery that way. I guess I'll just leave it there. But those should be taken off within the first few months. I sometimes just take them off right at planting and get rid of them. But depending on how floppy the wood is or how wind prone in the open area you are, I have taken off some of those in the tree of snap. I'm like, dang, that didn't work right. So then maybe you leave it on there for another month. But want to take those off before it gets fully established. Next thing is on irrigation is how much to water it. I always get that a lot. And as you see here, it's frequency, not volume. If you're going to put 10 gallons of water on that tree, you want to do it in 5 2-gallon installments instead of 1 10-gallon installment, right? When we drink water, we don't you drink from a water fountain, you don't drink from a fire hose, right? And the tree's the same way. It can only absorb so much water. Like you can only drink 2 gallons of water a day. Otherwise your body will reject it. Trees the same way. They can only absorb so much water. So by putting 10 gallons on, it might get 1 gallon and the rest just goes right to the soil and just go into other places and not watering your tree. So frequency, much better than volume. And then you're going to see a nice little irrigation based on tree size. So a 2-inch caliper tree, you're looking at probably like maybe a 7 to 15 gallon pot. 4-inch caliper, probably 15 to 25 gallon pot. Let's look at this. We're looking at, daily for a month, every other day for 3 months, weekly until established. So you're looking at twice a week for 3 to 4 months in some of these. They need to be watered to get them established. So those roots will grow into that soil and lock itself in. And then you're going to see here about hardness zone. We showed on the map earlier. I got a little map right here, but we're deadly right in the middle of 10A, right? So if you look at the 10A and what we're supposed to be doing, if you got a 1-inch, 3 months, and I'll let a 4-inch caliper, you need to do that for a full year. If you're up in the panhandle, you're looking at 2 years of watering if you're going to plant like a 15-gallon tree. You think anybody's watering for 2 years? I bet they aren't. So that's what you got to do if you want those specimen trees. You got to really treat them like what you want to have in the end, right? That's what we're always, what the things you do now are going to mean a lot in 20 years. And that's what we're trying to get. Do it right. As I said, what's that old thing? Like measure twice, cut once, right? And I want to do it multiple times. And this is once again a quick little thing to show you, kind of hammer it home. This tree's good up high. This tree's not too low. You want them up high, higher the better. And then this is the great little picture he has at the end that kind of shows the whole thing. So I use this in pretty much everything I have. But you see the mulch to the edge of the root ball, 3 inches, none on top. You got a nice, watering system just for the tree. You're not a shrub head here. Top of the root ball 10 feet above scale, above landscape scale, and then the backfill in this area. Most of the time, this root ball you're showing it in like burlap, but you would already have that root ball kind of broken up in the hole as we talked about planting. So, and if you want any of these PowerPoints, these are all free access on Ed Gilman's website. Here it is at the bottom. All pretty much, that's pretty much what this PowerPoint is. He's got hundreds of PowerPoints in here. From everything from pruning young trees, old trees, fixing trees. I mean, it's endless. So and that's what this pretty much comes from. And with that, any questions? Sure. There you go. And I'll stand up here if anybody's got questions. And here's my contact information. Any questions? Oh, well, I mean, back, yes.
Clark, those are beautiful planning procedures, but how close do you think the average professional planner?
The best ones do it, the cheap ones don't. You're gonna pay, you pay for what you get, 100%.
When's the best time to trim the hardwood? Palm trees down.
Rainy season.
Rainy season.
Yeah, that's when they need water. Anytime you're gonna trim out of that canopy, that tree, that's its solar cells that needs to gain energy. We need to have water to replenish and feed it. So unless you're, if you're not watering it every day, the best time is in the rainy season to do it. Yes.
You must be approaching. That's a question the HOA is. We want to trim them before the birds come back.
Birds?
To create nests.
Okay.
No birds.
Oh, okay, so that's a good one.
So are we?
Now you can trim for timing. I wouldn't do it for bird nesting in like your neighborhood, but usually like with palms, you want to do it so you don't get the palm, they don't turn into the berries that fall down and get palm rats. I go to a lot of HOAs that like, that's when you want to cut them off. It's already happened, but you'll notice that a lot of times people who don't do that, that's when they get the big, you got to pick up all the palm fronds at the bottom of the fronds with the
Well, I mean,
berries.
so we used to trim them before birds.
Sure.
So don't use that.
No, I mean, I like birds in my neighborhood. I mean, they need places to live. So, I mean, yeah, I would, once again, most of these trees aren't going to need a lot of, hopefully you're not, structurally, you're structurally pruning, and again, a good reason. You're not just saying like, oh, we need a hurricane cut, right? You get that a lot like, we need to cut them because the hurricane's coming. Like, no, oak trees have been evolving in a hurricane environment for like 10,000 years. They don't need a hurricane cut. Like, same thing with palm trees. They live in a hurricane environment. Why do we need a hurricane cut? They're just selling you on that to get money to keep it going, buddy. Like it doesn't do anything that beneficially help the tree. In fact, if you want to do the hurricane cut, I say right after the hurricanes come in, flip all the ones that are twisted and done and get that done that way instead of before. But a lot of times they sell you on this is cheaper, you get a better deal. I get all the time, like, it was a great deal. And it's like, yeah, but now your palm trees are falling. They don't look as good. Ganoderma's out now in there, and now they're gone. Now you got to replant all your palms. Yes.
So the city of Cape World, they have an ordinance where you can't mulch with the trees that are located within retention.
Yes. Makes sense.
And that actually includes, at least under our definition, state soil. So it's quite obvious.
Yes.
So what is your advice when it comes to planting trees? Because our code actually encourages planting trees, usually hybrid type of trees in those areas, to help make sure they get established.
Well, most of those are grassy, right? We have these grass areas that are in. I say remove all the grass out and plant trees, and then plant native stuff in there, like native grasses. If you go into the city of Naples, you'll see a lot of those retention areas that do that, where they pull all the grass out and it's just cypress trees in there, or something. And so you don't want to have mowers and grass and trees in the same mix. I always try to say that. So, you clump them together, what I suggest too. So like if you're gonna plant an area and then retention pond full of cypress trees, we'll say, is clump 20 together. Don't spread them all evenly out in there, do clumps. So a big clump of them and a clump of them.
I think I see what you're saying, like plant more native practices in.
Yes.
The area.
We don't need St. Augustine.
Well, the St. Augustine, people don't realize this, it doesn't do much with the water.
No.
So,
No.
it winds up dying anyway, so I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Yes.
The rule of thumb would be any woody plant, perennial, or tree, or palm. Those kinds of plants, minimum premises.
No, I was gonna say 10 years earlier. But yes, right, the rainy season,
20.
you're gonna save yourself all those watering costs. You're paying $10,000 a month on your watering bill or your HOA. You plant in the rainy season, you don't have to spend all that money. Right? And a lot of those native plantings we have don't need all that water. I'm like, we're just watering the water. Like, I mean, what's the point? That's just money flowing out of your thing that can be sent so many other ways. And plant area, plants that don't need all that water. Like, why are we planting, things that, all this grass? That's what I kind of get. It's like, we need to kind of get rid of all this grass and go to more like different stuff that doesn't need fertilizer and stuff to keep it green, like it's not doing the right thing. We can do better. So, anything else? All right, well, I'll be good at the end.
You have just, like, if you take away all that, we can deal with all the noise.
But have fun.
It's noise pollution,
It
it's
is.
extra fuel, it's fertilizer, it's.
And then if you got pine trees, they hate fertilizer. I see that every day. Like, why are my pine trees down? Well, you got green grass. That's one. That's great. But they don't work well together. So, and that's what mulching does too. It adds a berm to keep that green grass green. And you don't need to put all that extra fertilizer on the top of that root ball of a tree.
If you can find the best mulch, it's called floral mulch.
Yep.
Which is Melaleuca.
It just doesn't last long. I love it. I use it all the time. But it's one of the ones you've got to apply it all the time. It breaks down very quick. Versus like pine bark mulch will last like 2 years, right? So a lot of that black and red mulch, people want that color scheme, and that it's comes from cypress trees that last a really long time. So that's why they're purchasing that. But yes, I'm with you. Like, especially in your garden area like that, floral mulch is the way to go. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you.
Okay, and so for our final speaker today, we are very happy to have Heather Shields. So she serves as the Urban Forest Manager for the City of Naples. She's responsible for the urban forest, as well as the landscaping on city property. She reviews demolition, building, right-of-way permittance for compliance within the city's tree protection ordinance, as well as planning and design review petitions for developments to make sure that there are no negative impacts on the urban forest or public landscaping. She holds International Society, Society of Arboriculture Certified Arborist.
I'll just get right into it.
Qualified. We're very happy to have her here.
It's Venus before, so I'm not sure about the rest of them. Thank you. Good afternoon. It's my pleasure to be here. As she said, I'm the Urban Forest Manager for the City of Naples. No making faces at me, those of you who know me. And you might notice some pictures of yourself in here. So what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today is the Naples Urban Forest and the concept of being a Tree City USA and how managing an urban forest fits into the Tree City USA process and the pros and cons, while talking to you about some of the things that the city does to meet the standards. So most people have heard of Tree City USA. Man, I don't know exactly what it is. You've probably seen a sign when you've been somewhere that says someplace is a Tree City USA. Naples is. It's a program through the Arbor Day Foundation. And the Arbor Day Foundation, their goal is to inspire people to basically love and celebrate trees. Probably not something we have to discuss here in this room because you're all here. I'm guessing you're already meeting the goal of celebrating and wanting to do the best for trees. It was developed back in 1976. Not going to say that the city has been a member since 1976, but it's been around a long time. And again, to recognize and support cities and municipalities, leaders in the industry of maintaining your canopy cover, doing it right. Not getting it right all the time, but doing your best to get it right on a regular basis. They believe that a city that cares for its trees cares for its people. Because if you stop and think about a lot of the things that will make your life more pleasant, a tree is not going to be the final answer, but it sure is going to help. There's over 3,500 cities across the US that are Tree City USA, from little ones to big ones and everything in between. So it's pretty widespread program. And in order to be a Tree City USA, you have to meet 4 standards. We're gonna get into those in just a second, because before we get to those, I'll take a little trip down memory lane. The first tree planting project in Naples was done in 1912. And some residents brought coconut palms and planted them along what was Pier Street. Pier Street will later become 12th Avenue South, for those of you who are familiar with the layout of the city. And what their hope was that when people arrived by boat, they would get off on the pier, they'd walk down to this beautiful Pier Street and see these beautiful swaying coconut palms. So in 1912, Naples decided they were going to be a tree city. It's fun to note, we didn't actually become an incorporated city until 1923. So 11 years before we knew we wanted to be a city, we knew we wanted to be a tree city. And of course, it continues today. Naples, of course, I'm a little partial, beautiful parks, great playgrounds with shade, beautiful landscapes in our medians. We have great tree-lined shopping districts, and of course, canopy coverage over the sidewalks. Naples manages over 20,000 tree planting sites. Most of them are on our street tree program. If you're not familiar with the Naples Street Tree Program or how our urban forest works, we have a designated street tree program. So essentially each street has a designated species. I wish I could say that we had the quality or the quantity, I should say, of what Andrew was mentioning, but we're trying to improve with our variety of species. Naples, like every other municipality, is very guilty of planting, a couple dozen that seem to do well, and then there's a spare one here and there. We're working on changing some of those numbers up. Okay, Tree City USA, 4 requirements. Number 1, maintain a tree board or department. Naples has a tree board. We have a community services advisory board that functions as our tree board. This was the easiest way for us to meet this standard because the urban forest management is housed in Parks and Parkways, which is housed in the then Community Services Department. Long story short, we've gone through a name change. We might be going back. I don't know what department I work in. I work for the city. But that's how we got to our tree board. The tree board will review things like ordinance changes, our designated street tree program. They'll also hear permit application appeals and such that we'll get into in a little bit. But that's basically what they're there for. They do not manage day-to-day operations. They're there more for a guiding set of information as we have to make maybe more challenging decisions or make some changes, like I said, to codes or policies. Okay, item number 2 is have a community tree ordinance. This one can be tough. Now, the city does have an ordinance. We have a pretty tough ordinance. I've been booted from a lot of Christmas cards because of this tree ordinance. I'm not happy about it, but it's my job. It's how I pay my mortgage. Tree Protection Chapter 38. Something important to note about the city of Naples, which is unique from a lot of other municipalities in the state, is that we do not regulate your private property. We only regulate city planted trees. It means we planted it, it's on city property, and we take care of it. Don't touch it. However, if it's on your property, you can do whatever you want, and we don't get involved. Pros and cons to that, but that's how it is right now. So when we were rewriting the ordinance, one of the key things that is very important was our definitions. Alter or alteration is probably the most critical definition in the ordinance. It means to cut, remove, defoliate, or destroy a tree above or below ground by any means necessary. So at the end of the day, if you don't have loving eyes, don't look at my tree. Don't even think about it. Because it is pretty tough. But what it means is, okay, we can agree this was an alteration. I think it's pretty clear if the tree's gone, it's been altered in some capacity. But what it also does is it talks about something like this. Because destroying the roots sometimes can be more detrimental than some of the stuff you can do to the canopy. But it also means things like this. This is from a swing that somebody put on our tree. And it choked out the whole limb. We ended up having to remove this limb. So an alteration, this was an alteration, in terms of what they did. That bound their, stopped, nutrients and everything from flowing into tree. So we got that one there as well. So that definition is very important. It really has to cover everything. Two other things worth noting kind of in the way we define things. Each individual city tree unlawfully altered is presumed to be irreparable and irreversible. This is important because the finding of fact in a code enforcement case in the state of Florida is irreparable and irreversible. So we don't have to make our board decide it. I don't have to disagree with another arborist who's saying, yes, but the tree is going to be just fine. Sometimes just fine might not necessarily be what it used to be. Now, of course, there are different levels of alterations, different levels of code violations. But at the end of the day, if we go before the code board, if you've touched it, it's irreparable and irreversible, regardless of whether it was 5 branches you took or you took the whole thing down. Another one that comes in very handy for us is each individual city tree unlawfully altered is a separate offense. Again, state statute for the state of Florida, an offense is defined by a property. So that means if Mrs. Miller removes 5 trees, she's 1 violation. The state also caps what you can do, how you can go after somebody, how much you can potentially fine them or get back in terms of restoration. Well, if you took down 5 trees, I tell you right now, the cap is not going to give me enough money to fix it. Now it's 5 trees because we defined it in a different manner. So our ordinance would supersede that 1 property definition by the state statute. Now, we're not unreasonable. Although there might be people who might think that, Barry, stop laughing. We do have a tree alteration permit process, and actually Sam in Barry's office is a pro at it. I should really have had Sam come. The most common permits that people look for are ones to remove royal palm, dead fronds, and seed pods. City of Naples does not prune our royal palms. They're considered self-pruning, so we let them self-prune. We have a lot of residents and visitors, seasonal residents, who would prefer to remove those seed pods and those dead fronds. So a lot of people do get that permit. We also have off-cycle pruning. Maybe you want to manage the ficus tree a little bit closer. A builder might need to get trusses up. So there's some other opportunities there to trim some of our various trees. You can put in for a permit to remove a tree. Chances are you're not going to get it because you have to be, the battery's running low.
PC.
Oh, I'm like, how do I? Okay, yeah. Woo, okay, guys, I don't know how fast I can go. You got this? Okay. Okay. So there's 4 different reasons that you could potentially ask to remove a tree. One is that it poses a safety hazard. It's a safety hazard, I can guarantee you we've already removed it. It's an invasive species. The urban forest of the city right now actually has 2, and they're on US 41. There are 2 Bishop Woods in the medians. Just as an FYI, the gentleman in the back is taking those out in June, so we will have none. It's so diseased or weakened by ages or storms, they pose a damage. Again, these are things we want you to tell us because these are things we're going to come take care of. And the last one, which is the one most of the time is used, is unreasonably prevents the development of a lot, parcel, or the use thereof. It's a hard one to sell because it says unreasonably prevents. It doesn't say you can't have your circular driveway in the exact location that you want it. So, but that's our tree alteration process. Not perfect, but we tried. This doesn't work anymore. That's okay. Can do it this way? No, did it go? No. Let's do it. Page down. Oh, there we go. Okay. The other thing that our tree code covers is trees and building. Construction is probably the single worst thing for a tree to go through once it's been put in the ground. Because let's think about it, we're gonna take away all the green space, all the grass, all the irrigation, and we're gonna put down rocks and we're gonna park there. Worst thing that can happen to a tree. So we do have established guidelines for tree protection during our demolition and construction. They're not perfect again, but we're trying. We're actually hoping to do some modifications to this next year. So that's a tree ordinance. A lot of different ways to do that. That's what the city did to meet that portion of the Tree City USA. So here's the fun one. Spend at least $2 per capita on the urban forest. Doesn't sound too hard, right? So in the city, since we have city trees, as I said, we're gonna plant them, we're gonna maintain them, we're gonna remove them when they're dead, and then we're gonna start all over again. So our tree fill-in and replacement program, it's approximately $300,000 a year. And that is what we use to replant our trees, specifically along streets. But they can be used in medians and parks as well. We have had a lot more loss, obviously, from hurricanes in recent years. I'm quite tired of it. Anybody who thinks hurricanes are job security for people in urban forestry, we don't need to be this secure. A little bit of history in life is very good. Our pruning cycles. We worked pretty hard on our pruning cycles in the year in 2016-17, actually right before Irma. They were adopted. Pruning, I think, is one of the best things you can do after you pick the right tree in the right place and you plant it correctly. You have to keep maintaining it. So our pruning cycles are pretty tight. And I can tell you from Hurricane Irma, we lost over 10% of our urban forest. By Ian, after we've had a trim cycle in place, that is, I'll get to in a second how drilled it down, we lost less than 1%. What?
Different stuff.
They were different storms, yes, but I do think there is some level of comparison there in terms of doing things better. In that the water didn't push them all over. So we trim our hardwood trees every 2 years. These are going to be your mahoganies, your black olives, your Cuban laurels, trees of that nature. We trim tropical flowering trees every year. These are going to be Royal Poincianas and Hong Kong orchids. The reason for that is that their growth is just so laggy and so aggressive that if we don't, they're going to be touching the ground. We do coconut palms twice a year, October and April. Reason for that is obviously we want them to look nice for our residents, our visitors over the holidays, our snowbirds, all of that. And then of course we want to get those projectiles off before the hurricanes come. Changing coconut palm pruning to twice a year, probably cut the number of phone calls my office gets in half. Because everybody always wants to know when the palms are being trimmed. And then we do staple palms every other year. There's some other things that factor in here as well, but that's the basis of it. If you're doing the math in your head, it's about just over $1 million worth of trimming annually. Tree removal. You got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them. You have to remove trees. I argue this with people regularly because they don't understand it, but sometimes they just have to come down. Could be a health issue. Maybe they were struck by lightning. Maybe they're so in decline that they're going to create a risk or a hazardous condition. As a rule of thumb, if I cannot sit in a courtroom and tell somebody I had no idea the tree was going to fall, the tree is coming down. And we also remove them because of conflict. Obviously, as a tree lover, as I said earlier, this is my job. This is how I pay my mortgage, this is how I take care of my kid. But I'm not going to sacrifice something else if there's a conflict. Fire hydrant, street light, these are not things that need trees around them. There were places that trees have been planted in the past. We're all a victim of who held our job before us, and we have to move forward with them. Tree removal is just over 100,000. Now, this is just a little tip of the iceberg. There's a couple other programs that mix into this, but that's the basics. $2 per capita. Naples City has approximately 20,000 people in it. Do we have a guess on what we spend? Anybody? Nobody will take a stab? Okay, well, listen, don't share this number, and especially not with the city council. It's a nice budget. I don't like to share this number when I go to conferences because I'm always afraid I'm gonna get stoned in the square. Because in comparison to a lot of other municipalities, Naples really does budget, quite a lot for, the tree care. The last one, celebrating Arbor Day. We actually just this morning read our Arbor Day proclamation at our city council meeting because National Arbor Day is next Friday, the 25th, is the National Arbor Day. Although the city doesn't celebrate it then, we celebrate Tree Fest, which is in June. And a little plug, if you're available, June 7th from 9 to noon in Baker Park. We have a really great day, a lot of different community organizations come to us. You can see Clark. Clark will be there. He usually gives away some trees and different stuff like that, so come early. But it's a great day. We try to build on it a little bit every year. We've been doing this for 3 years now. So that's Tree City USA. City's done it for 27 years. Wish it was a little bit better. There's some higher, there's definitely some lower. But that's Tree City USA in a nutshell. So why do it? Well, Tree City USA is the foundation of a quality urban forest management. It gives you all the key areas where you need to function, where you need to kind of take note and get stuff done. Not gonna lie, there's a little bit of community pride in that. I notice when I go places, when someone has the Tree City USA sign and I see it says like 5 years, I'm like, yeah. You know, then I'll go to a place and I'll be like 60, ooh, okay. But there is something to be said about that. People who look at trees look at that kind of stuff. I notice it. I'm also one of those people that will pull the weeds at the botanical gardens because I just can't take it. Why can't they weed the garden? And then lastly, it does help with grant applications. There's a lot of money out there right now through the Florida Forest Service and other organizations. Tree City USA has given you the basis for being able to apply for those grants. That's the kind of information that the organizations that are putting grants out there are looking for, a community to have. Okay, so of course if there's pros, there's always cons, right? The first one is probably the commitment. You have to do this every year. This isn't a one-year accomplishment. You have to do all 4 of these things every single year. The application isn't hard, but it has to be done. And with communities, maybe having people switching jobs, switching, responsibilities, it gets lost in the shuffle. So there are probably communities out there right now that were last year and didn't get it this year because somebody forgot the application. One of the issues in Florida is that if you have a tree board, it has to work in the sunshine. For those of you who are not familiar with the intricacies of government work in Florida, everything that a board or committee does has to be in the sunshine. So that board can't meet in my office the third Thursday of the month over pizza. They have to have a meeting. There has to be minutes. It has to be recorded. It has to meet a certain set of criteria. For smaller communities, that can definitely be a challenge, even for bigger ones, to have to put on a whole nother public meeting. State statute is starting to come out that conflicts with a lot of ordinances that municipalities have. It's a big challenge right now. I know it's one that various people who work with Andrew work on sometimes. We're with the ISA Association, they're always working on that. Because there's some big conflicts coming out there that we're all working through as an industry. Population-based spending can be tough. Not for a small community. I only have 20,000 people. I told you I need to spend over 100 grand removing trees. I'm golden. But you look at a bigger county or a bigger city, where you're talking about 400,000 people, 700,000 people, that can be a hefty budget for a community that has a lot of pull on their resources. But at the end of the day, we do it for a reason. Like I said earlier, you know, trees can solve almost everything. They can help solve almost every issue that we have. They keep our air and water clean. They help us with shade and cooling. They're going to clean the air, sequester the carbon, give us fresh oxygen. They're going to reduce our energy. They're going to trap stormwater, not only in their roots, but up in their canopy. They're going to slow it down. No, they're not going to stop it in a monsoon when we have a hurricane coming through. We're talking about a day-to-day issue. They're going to help. You know, they're going to increase our property values. Who doesn't want their house to be worth more next year than it was this year? Habitat for wildlife, you know, you're talking about the birds. I mean, that's where they need to be. And at the end of the day, who wouldn't rather walk through a beautiful park with a canopy than down a concrete sidewalk? Makes you feel better. It's just that simple. And with that, I can be done and answer any questions or concerns. And I'll put that up there. If there's something that we don't get to, take a picture. I'm happy to answer whatever I can. Yes, sir.
Kind of discussion of grant application, and who would qualify for the grant?
You know, they've changed it a lot right now. And I know just recently the Florida Forest Service, another division that is associated with the same area that Clark's at, they have put out multiple grants, and you don't have to be a municipality anymore. It can be a homeowners association, it can be a nonprofit, it can be, you know, obviously cities, municipalities, they can go to schools now. So they have really started to open it up. Organizations that work with equality scores. So just about anybody who can put together a good program can apply for grants. So there's a lot of them out there, a lot of money to be had. The problem is you have to have somebody who can, again, who can spend the time to sit down and write it. And that is becoming more and more of the issue. Well, and actually, no, the Forest Service funds have not been matching recently. They've been coming out with ones that have just been flat money. The city just got one for $20,000 and we didn't have to match it. So they're coming out with that as well.
How do you learn about these grants?
The easiest way to learn about the Florida Forest Service ones is to just put in Florida Forest Service grant and they'll pop up. I know there's 2 of them, if I'm not mistaken, that are open right now. I don't know what they're all for. But they're rolling them out, about every quarter, every 6 months, maybe.
The city doesn't have any grant.
No, the city does not have any grant money. No, we apply for grants, but we don't have, we apply for grants, but we don't have any grants to disperse, in that capacity. I know locally, the, Collier County, or the Collier Community Foundation does do grants. I don't know if they do any for trees, but I do know that, they have a lot of different stuff through them that they give money away for. Yes?
Few questions. Your vice chair, Brian Smith.
Yes.
Is he the same Brian Smith that works for Insight?
I don't know. I'm sorry, I don't know him that well to know where he's employed.
Okay, when you have somebody on your board, you know, you should know where they're from.
Well, I mean, they're vetted through the city council, so
Yeah.
I didn't pick him,
Yeah.
so.
Okay. I'm just letting you know, Brian's about. But
Yeah.
Anyway, my real question is, you have a tree fund for the city where people can actually mitigate for trees if they don't count enough, spatial room on their site on certain.
We don't require planting for single family homes.
I'm not talking about
Commercial development, no, we do not give them the out. They have to plant it on their property. There's not mitigation for you to not plant what is required through planning.
Hypothetically, let's say if you have a program, how would that affect the grant writing, et cetera, for instance, and let's say that would be allowed?
To allow them to mitigate for something like that? You have to remember, we don't regulate private trees. All of our stuff is city-based trees, so we get all of our awards based on our urban forest. So it doesn't matter what a private property does.
So even if you're in the political jurisdiction of that area,
Mhm.
it's a private development and you're regulating the trees.
Right.
They take down a tree, for instance, do they have to replace that tree or is it like and take that's it?
If it's a single family home, it doesn't matter.
No, I mean,
If it's a commercial development, it would defer to their PUD, which would defer to planning. That doesn't function under our urban forest management is strictly what we own. So 20,000 trees that we own. Things like commercial properties, if they remove something, are they required to put it back? Yes. And can they mitigate it by paying? No. You're gonna put it back. Yeah, there's no saying I'm sorry with the check.
I've heard, and I used to work in Lee County, I've heard that. Moving trees, $500.
Yeah, that's a good one, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't know who that was. They must have caught me on a good day. It's been my birthday. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not gonna, I can tell you right now, Barry's heard that Barry knows, he doesn't personally know his business has ever done anything, but I know that he's aware of the people who think I'm what was the problem.
Tree fund from surveys on upgrading that. Was I thought it was a homeowners.
Yeah.
You did limit definition, you're talking definition of tree. But Lee County would consider a tree represents are, I mean, that's the Koeser and what the code enforcement. There's only one case where I actually proved trees were directly on it. And that was cases in the front of 41 across the page.
Well, and that's why we define it that if you alter it,
Yeah.
you've done irreversible and irreparable harm.
Right.
It's not a debate.
But what about applying NCA 300 standards to that as well? Because there's a lot of municipalities that have that adopted as far as proper, international known cleaning practices.
If we have a code violation, okay, and let's say company ABC trimmed a city tree, okay, and it was done properly. They didn't hat rack it, it was good cuts, we didn't have stubs. But at the end of the day, they trimmed a city tree. We will work with that company to say, okay, this is the process you were supposed to follow. Maybe you didn't know it was a city tree. Maybe it was a newer company who didn't know the process. So your first one is always kind of a slap on the wrist. We may fine them. Typically what we've started doing is they will be fined or asked to make a donation we do have a tree fund, but it doesn't function for what you're talking about. We'll ask them to make a donation to the tree fund, and we typically utilize 2 trim cycles, whatever the cost of trimming that tree is. So if it's $350, you're gonna owe us $700. If they elect to not take us up on that, we will take them to code enforcement for $5,000 because we know that they did irreparable harm. We're not gonna have to debate it. Now, typically, a lot of times it's, hey, I didn't know, I'm sorry. We try to work through it and we don't go to code. I can tell you right now, I've been to code enforcement maybe 3 times in the last 5 years. It just doesn't happen because we try very, very hard to work through these situations. And I've gotten $15,000 checks without going to code board because companies or residents want to work through this. They don't want to be before the code board.
Okay, really quick, I just wanna, thank you.
No problem.
I wanna recognize that this is a little bit over time, so really fast, our speakers are going to stay here. If you have further questions, you can come up and ask them. I'm gonna wrap this up really fast. So one more big round of applause for all of our speakers and also one more for Granta, our sponsor, for providing us with wonderful snacks, which hope you guys have all enjoyed. Feel free to take some before you leave. Really quick, before you guys go, I do have JoJo in the back. She's going to be handing out evaluations with pens. If you wouldn't mind filling those out, it really helps us on our end meet y'all's needs and figure out what you are interested in so that we can provide actually what you need. Once you're done filling it out, we're just going to return it right back to her. If you need CEUs, you're going to see Marissa up here. She has all of them with her. So if you need any of those, go see her. Again, really quick reminder, we will be sending out a follow-up email that will have the presentations as well as the recording. And then I'll also get the links for all of the resources that they mentioned and pop those into the email for easy access for you. If you are interested in any other upcoming events we do have some flyers over there if you'd like to check them out. Thank you once again for attending. A big part of why we hosted this lecture is because there has recently been some interest in seeing Collier County and the entire county become a tree city. So there are actually 5 other counties in Florida that are tree cities, and there's been interest in potentially turning Collier County into the 6th one, so protecting the entire county's trees. If this is something you are interested in supporting, come talk to me and Marissa. We can tell you how to help out with that. But just finally, we at the Greenscape Alliance really want to encourage you guys to go out and promote sustainability through planting native plants, conserving our water and our wetlands, and choosing, maintaining, and protecting our urban trees.